What's going on, YouTube fam? Hope you guys are well. And I am just sitting here in my office putting the final finishing touches on my new program, The Art of Street Persuasion. And this last module is jam-packed with really good stuff. And so I figured, you know what? Let me just go live with this and shoot this for you guys and hook you up with this content, because there's no fluff. Just like all my programs, there's no fluff in any of it. It's real actionable stuff. And here's what's cool. The stuff that I'm going to show you in this video training is not stuff that I really see other people talk that much about. It's unconventional. And so that's what really separates street persuasion, as I like to call it, from traditional persuasion, right? Because it's persuasion tactics and strategies that work in the real world, right? Because you could learn about a tactic, you could learn about a strategy, but persuasion is not rigid and black and white, right? It's based on human psychology, but that doesn't necessarily mean that every technique is going to work in every situation, or that every technique or strategy is warranted in every situation, right? We have to take context, environment, circumstance into account whenever we are communicating with other people. So I'm going to hook you up with a free copy of the sample edition of the Street Persuasion Playbook. I'll put that link in the description. You can go ahead and grab that for free. But for now, let's jump right in. So much of your work as a persuasive speaker is going to revolve around information gathering, right? It's how much do you actually know about the person or the people that you are communicating with, right? You have to know about their thoughts, their values, their beliefs, their opinions, their outlooks on the world, right? The more of that information you have, the better. Okay, so in the previous part of this program, I talked about the importance of feedback and how it contributes not only to the linear progression of an interaction, but to the formation of powerful, persuasive statements in different contexts. Eliciting the right kind of feedback requires a knowledge of objects, events, and conditions that impact a person's core system, which is their values and their beliefs, as well as people's understanding of the world at large. And so here are the most important aspects of your subject. Now look, I don't really like the word subject because it makes this feel like it's like a science experiment or something like that when we're actually communicating with real people. But that's the term that most people in the world of persuasion that teach it use, and that's the word that most people are familiar with. But subject could just simply mean your prospect, your client, your audience, or the group or the person that you're communicating with. So first one is environment. Your environment plays a crucial role in molding you as a person. So I want you to think about the old sociological theory, which states that people are a bit like onion bulbs. In the beginning, you have that core that allows you to learn from the environment, and then you can gain and multiply layers of personhood and identity over time, right? The layering occurs because there's a fixed and definite need to grow and develop as an individual. So in short, whether we like it or not, environment affects who we are, right? Most people are not the same person that they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, right? There are changes that we go through and growing, right? There's a growing process that we go through. And much of that is dictated by our environment. A person's environment also influences the kind of struggles that people experience on a day-to-day basis. So for example, a person who refuses to commit to a new endeavor that requires the expenditure of resources, time, money, energy, may be struggling with the acquisition of resources, or has limited resources to begin with and finds it impractical to pursue an activity that would reduce something that they feel is already limited. So a person's current roster of personal struggles can become a central obstacle to persuasion, right? So you, as a persuasive speaker, you have to be able to elicit the type of feedback that reveals the various spaces that a person negotiates in their own life, as well as the conditions that they've contended with while navigating those spaces, because only then can you really be able to empathize with someone. Because I'll tell you now, and we're going to get into this, like, empathy is a super powerful, genuine empathy is a super powerful thing to have, not just in the world of communication, but not just in the world of persuasion and influence and salesmanship and marketing, but just in life, right? The ability to actually empathize with somebody, to walk in their shoes, to understand where they're coming from, and to have them understand that you know where they're coming from is just, it's a great trait to develop. The worst thing that you can have is fake empathy, where you're pretending to empathize with somebody for the sake of coercing them or manipulating them. And so fake empathy is always a result of you trying to make it sound like you understand where the person's coming from, but you don't actually know where they're coming from because you haven't listened or paid attention enough to understand these different things that I'm talking about here, right? And so it's important that to develop the trait of having true empathy with people. This is a key skill in the game, like I said, of language and persuasion. To empathize with someone is to speak and act with the full understanding of the other person's point of view. A person's point of view involves not only knowledge, but also particular experiences that influence the other person's emotions and thought patterns. All of these things emanate from the environment where a person is rooted, or from where they're rooted. And so there are certain questions that I like to ask to really explore this. So some of them are, what kind of activities do you like best? What do you usually do on a regular day? What do you wake up to daily? What things do you still want to accomplish? What part of the world would you like to visit and why? What kind of people do you have to deal with or manage? What would your ideal environment look like and why? And then what I like to do after that is I'll just probe a little bit deeper, right? So it's not that difficult. Like, the main questions that you're always asking are who, what, when, where, and why, right? So you ask, what kind of activities do you like best? And then when they tell you a follow-up activity, a follow-up question could be, why is that important to you? Or when did you get involved in that activity? Who do you share that activity with? With whom do you participate in that activity with, right? Just simply asking probe questions. Now, here's a little inside tip. I think I shared this in an earlier video. One of the key indicators that gives away the secret to someone not paying attention to you or not really being interested in what you have to say is a lack of probing questions. So if I'm communicating with somebody and I tell them something or I share something with them and they don't ask me a single probing question, that is a key indicator that they're just not really interested in what I have to say. And so that doesn't necessarily make somebody a bad person. Like, I know plenty of good people that just are self-centered. They're, and this could even be people that overall are not selfish people. Like, it's not to say that they wouldn't share things with you or they're not kind and courteous. Sometimes they're just very self-centered, right? They see the world as, rather than just kind of one big environment with all different types of people and situations in it, they kind of see themselves at the center of everything. And so a key indicator of, and usually, by the way, again, this has nothing to do with character or whether you're a good person or a bad person, but those people are generally poor communicators, right? So look, this channel is not about, I'm not a self-help guru. I'm not I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a doctor or anything like that, right? And sure, the ability to influence and persuade and be a better communicator might make you a better person, but that's not what this channel is about. I'm not here to teach you how to become a better person. I'm not here to talk to you about values and what's right and what's wrong. What I am here to do is help you become a better communicator. And I can tell you now that the inability to ask probing questions is a key trait of a poor communicator. So you have to learn how to do that. Next thing is actions and behavior. A person's actions will always speak more truthfully than their words because actions rarely hide intentions. A person can speak about many things and layer the message so that the core intention is hidden from plain sight. In this context, you as a persuasive speaker would fare well by delving into the other person's history. Patterns rarely lie. And if you can work out a pattern in how your subject thinks and acts, you can prepare in advance so that you will not be caught off guard. The following questions will help you calibrate your subject's past and current behavior. What current behavior is aligning well with your current intention and goals? How well do you know your subject? I'm not asking you how well you know them. You're asking the person how well do they know their subject. How much of your supposed knowledge of your subject is aligned with what you see during the interaction? If there are certain misalignments, what do you think is the reason for these misalignments? What particular things do you notice in your subject's ideas and behavior? And in what way will you be able to align yourself with your subject without losing sight of your goal and what you want to accomplish with the interaction? What nonverbal signals does your subject express while interacting with you? What emotions does your subject regularly express throughout the interaction? Do they have a natural tendency to be led, or is it the other way around? Does your subject have a strong personality to the point that you're drawn to them because of their natural aura as an authority figure? And how are they responding to your message, verbal language, and nonverbal signals? Number 3 is their core system. So, a person's core system is comprised of their values and beliefs. Both of these elements come together in influencing a person's capacity to accept new ideas and act upon them. Whenever you speak to a subject, you are conversing not only with the person, but you're also negotiating with that person's core system. Human communication can be likened to the game of chess. If you are aligned well, you have the advantage of both offense and defense. You can harmonize well with the other person. Inner and outer resistance are immediately dealt with, and you're able to move into a clinch commitment, which is the final phase of any persuasion effort. Why are beliefs important? So, you might think that your subject's beliefs are none of your business and that they have zero impact at the negotiation table. But that's not true. And this misconception has harmed countless negotiations simply because the persuasive speaker or unpersuasive speaker didn't take into consideration the various factors that could affect the outcome of the dialogue. A person's beliefs and values determine the possibility of change. If you had to sit down and negotiate with another person, then it's obvious that you're there to create change. How do you convince another person to make a change if you don't understand what makes them tick? This is very important. It's super important to try to get a handle on people's beliefs and understand them before you communicate with them, period. because lots of times you could be using examples or metaphors or analogies that are not aligned with the other person's beliefs or that they might find offensive. You know, one of the things that I do largely these days is I work with one-on-one clients, consulting and coaching them to help build online marketing campaigns to help them get new clients and customers and sales. And so the one thing that I always explain to them is that when it comes to marketing, really when it comes to influence, persuasion, salesmanship, or any type of communication where you're trying to elicit a response of some sort, essentially what you are doing is you are trying to create a new idea or to have the other person accept an idea of some sort, right? And that idea is your idea. It's your idea that basically supports and drives the entire message that you're trying to create. And so, like, when it comes to marketing, what I try to explain to people is no matter what you're selling, whether you are selling a course that helps people fix their relationships or improve their back pain or improve their golf swing or get better at jiu-jitsu or karate or boxing or guitar or whatever it may be, regardless of what you're selling, there's only one thing that people are buying. What they're buying is a new future. A future where they no longer have a bad relationship. A future where they no longer have back pain. A future where they're better at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. A future where their golf game is much better. They're always buying a better future. And so if you're communicating with them, but you're never taking into consideration what their beliefs are, you could very easily start painting a picture of that new future that you think is enticing, intriguing, and interesting to them, but that they actually cannot relate to whatsoever. So, for example, if you were selling a course, and let's just say your course, the majority of your demographic are middle-aged, far-right, conservative, Trump-loving white guys, okay? And this is not a political video. I'm just using this as an example. And you start using an analogy in your course about a secret that Hillary Clinton discovered when she was in the Senate or Congress or wherever she was, right? You're going to cause an instant disconnection from those people because now instead of focusing on your message, they're focusing on why you're talking about something that contradicts their beliefs. And so this is the importance of understanding a person's beliefs when you communicate with them. These are some of the questions you could use to make sense of their core systems. What items on the negotiation table are deemed important or essential by the other person? What specific statements, phrases, or ideas elicit the best feedback from them? Each interaction presents a tug of war of right and wrong, revolving around a central concept. Is your sense of right and wrong harmonized with what your subject believes in? Does your subject frequently use words like must and must not? If so, do your subject statements, what do they reveal about their personality and beliefs, and how will you use this information to make your message more appealing or attractive? What are your beliefs about the situation? What are your central assumptions when it comes to feedback or response of your subject to your message? If another person were in your situation, what other strategies would this person employ to succeed in convincing your subject? Once you've identified these other strategies, would you be able to employ them effectively? Why or why not? Next is self-image and identity. A person's perception of themselves can be viewed as the vital, my writer that helped me put this course together, sometimes she uses words that are a little too crazy for me. This is one of them. Amalgamation of the previous elements combined. So I'll say that that's the vital combination or culmination of the previous elements. In the discipline of NLP, we always assume that a person is always more than their ideas, words, and action. In short, as persuasive speakers, We cannot fall into the trap of pigeonholing people. We must practice restraint when making general assumptions about people that we interact with, lest we commit the final fatal mistake of actually working with inaccurate assumptions. An inaccurate assumption is even more harmful. Let's just fix this. An inaccurate assumption is even more harmful than not paying close attention to feedback. At least with feedback, you can ask questions and reacquire what you missed. Working with a faulty framework can make you say things that can backfire on you during the interaction. Now, there are two main ways of getting to know your subject. You can research your subject beforehand, asking people that know him or her, or looking at their social media, or you can try to gauge your subject during an actual interaction. So I call this gathering intelligence. It's just simply learning as much as you can about the person that you are communicating with. Now, again, sometimes we have preconceived intelligence where we have the luxury of going and checking out their social media, looking at their profiles to get kind of a gauge of what their hobbies, values, interests are. But sometimes we don't have that luxury. And so sometimes we have to be able to do it kind of on the spot, right? Like real time intelligence gathering. We could do that in two ways: verbally by asking questions, and non-verbally by assessing body language. So let's talk about some of the questions that we could ask. How would you describe yourself as a whatever, CEO, thought leader, coach, consultant, author, expert? What type of person are you when you're with your family or close friends? How do you tend to classify people? What is your basis for classification? How do you think other people perceive you? How accurate do you think they really are? What people, places, or things do you associate with yourself? Now look, some of these questions are definitely a little deeper and maybe a little bit more forward than you would want to ask on an initial interaction, but that's fine. Just maybe think 2, 3, or maybe even 4 steps above this. So something that maybe is a little bit more general or a little bit more vague, but is kind of related to this type of a question or the type of questions that you are seeing here. Notice that all these questions revolve around how a person sees themselves. So apart from the necessary contrasting done in the 4th question, how do you think other people perceive you? How accurate do you think they are? The speaker's task revolves around discovering the subject's reflexive perceptions. Would it still be necessary to delve into these details even if you know the other person well? Yes, even more so, because we tend to become lazy when we're around people we're familiar with. No matter how familiar you are with another person, it's highly likely that there are still aspects of them that you don't know about and have never thought of exploring because you've become comfortable with the other person already. Now, there's definitely nothing wrong with being comfortable, but don't let this get in the way of being a critical communicator. People often have at least 2 personalities, one that they reserve when they're with the company of friends or loved ones, and another one that is used when they need to negotiate with others. Don't think for a moment that someone that you're familiar with will give in easily just because they know you. On the contrary, people tend to become more competitive when they're in the company of acquaintances and friends precisely because, like you, they feel like they're going to have an easier time persuading others. Always remember that your subject is trying to persuade you just as much as you are trying to persuade them. So, the last thing we're going to talk about here are some common communication barriers. These are some things that, generally speaking, will stand in your way when communicating, when trying to influence, when trying to persuade, and what to do about them. So, first thing you need to understand is that human perception is never universal and perfect. There are always misalignments, gaps, and issues that affect how a person perceives and understands the world at large. So in this regard, it's important for you as the communicator to understand the common flaws that occur with people's thinking so you can recognize them in actual interactions. The moment you recognize the flaws in your subject's consumption of ideas, you can then gently realign the other person's thinking by offering a contrapuntal reading of the situation, one that is more or less rationally aligned with your message or proposal. So the one thing that I want you to understand here, and this is like a drum that I beat to death when I talk to people about communication, and this really comes from the world of NLP. It's an NLP presupposition, and that is that the map is not the territory, meaning that the mental maps that we as human beings have of the world are all different representations of what the world really is, meaning we all perceive reality and the real world differently. Objective reality is actually very subjective. And so because the reason for that is because we all filter our experience through different emotions, values, thoughts, beliefs, opinions, and rational ways of thinking that we think are rational, right? And so what that means is, like, if you were looking at a map, whether it's like a physical map or a GPS system on your phone or something like that, what you're seeing there is like a digital representation of some location. But when you actually get to that location, it doesn't look the same as it does on the map, right? That's just a different representation of what it really looks like. Well, that's how human beings make sense of the world. We use mental maps, which are these representations of reality as we see it. And so, of a poor communicator is someone that doesn't take this into consideration and just simply believes that everyone sees the world the same way. And so, more importantly, they believe that everyone sees the world as they do. And so they just can't understand or wrap their mind around somebody disagreeing with them or not seeing something the same way they do or having the same opinion that they do. And so they immediately become flustered and angry instead of learning how to elegantly and efficiently and effectively move the person toward a different way of thinking. So the first common barrier is binary thinking, and this is by far the most common communicative barrier, and it happens mainly because pop culture has a tendency to create irrational pairs to comprehend events and phenomena. Binary thinking presupposes that there are always two major forces at play, and subjects either fall into positive side or the negative side of the binary. So in order to break the binary, you have to approach the issue with a pluralistic orientation. Example is that the object or the subject can have several attributes at once, and no such natural pairing really exists. A good example of binary thinking is when people reduce arguments to good and bad. If one option is bad, then the other option has to be good. With binary thinking, there are no gradations, frequencies, or levels to think of, only pairs that represent acceptable or unacceptable elements. What I'd like to emphasize here is that options can be good, can be all good, all bad, or they may represent varying frequencies of gradations of both. Black and white thinking must be erased from the interaction because it grays out many potential zones where the speaker should be able to maneuver around. Next is fixedness and fixation. This communicative barrier often appears when a person is exposed to some form of trauma or negative event. What happens is that after the trauma, which could be mental, physical, emotional, financial, the subject is unable to move past the state created by the trauma. There's no longer a past to learn from, nor a future to look forward to. Everything is defined by the trauma, and it begins to color everything else in the subject's way of thinking. One way to help a subject see beyond a bad experience is by allowing them to remember things as they were. The process of remembering becomes a guided and conscious activity, a sharp contrast with the selective remembering, instant flashbacks associated with the trauma. Next is oversimplifications. This is a big one, or a common one, I should say. Oversimplification or generalization of a situation occurs when a person creates conclusions based on meager information and little or no prior analysis. Generalizations are often used to justify old beliefs and values or to stave off new ideas. A generalization can easily be countered by citing specific details that counter the logic of the generalization. The foundational logic of oversimplification is that one type of reasoning applies to a large or unlimited set of objects. So I'll give you an example. I have a friend who is in the world of fitness, and he's extremely good at what he does. He's a personal trainer and gets people into phenomenal shape. And so he knows a lot about exercise and nutrition. And so his method of, I should say, nutrition is that when he wakes up, he always eats a big breakfast. That's the routine that he follows. And so and I have to say that routine works extremely well for him because he's in great shape. He's in certainly way better shape than I am in. And so whenever we talk about this concept of intermittent fasting, he will always generalize and just kind of write it off as a gimmick. He'll say that it's something that people are using these days as a gimmick to sell them something else, right? And so while there certainly is truth to that, I also believe that there are, based on the science and the research that I've seen, that there are a lot of benefits to intermittent fasting. Part of it is that every time we consume food, cortisol is released in our body. Like, processing and digesting food is like a very big process for our body. And so if we could give our body a break from that, there are lots of different side benefits that come from that. But again, this is neither here nor there because I'm not a health expert or a nutritional expert. But what I will say is that I have found that there is a lot of research that supports intermittent fasting that doesn't have to do with calorie restriction. Okay, so that's part of it, right? Eating less calories than you consume will definitely help you lose weight, and fasting is a tool that will help you do that. But there are many side benefits that come with fasting that are not directly related to calorie consumption. He will not accept any of those. He writes them all off and refuses to look at any of that research and just generalizes fasting as a gimmick for one simple reason, because it doesn't fit into his current regimen. He wakes up every day and has a big breakfast within an hour after waking up, which is the complete opposite of what most people do when they fast. Now, by the way, there are different ways to fast. You could fast, you could eat earlier in the day and fast later in the day. But again, that's neither here nor there. The point is that he will use this big generalization about how it's a gimmick because he'll say all it is a tool to help you lose weight because by fasting you're eating less calories. And so then what I'll have to do is cite specific details that support other health benefits of fasting. So that's an example of oversimplifying or generalizing and how I overcome it. A generalizing statement often serves as a stopping point or a cork that prevents a person from pursuing a line of action or thinking. In the context of an interaction, a generalization may prevent a person from agreeing with a new set of ideas based on an existing generalization that includes or covers the same issues. Now, it should be noted, not all generalizations are inadequate or harmful. So, for example, the statement, many cacti species are prickly, can be considered a generalization, and yet it's mostly useful in steering clear of them, since many of them are quite prickly. What we should be wary about are overgeneralizations that prevent a person from considering alternative angles and new information. So again, what I will then do is I will circle back to a belief and a value that I know my friend has. So one of his core beliefs is that we should take care of our bodies, and like one of his values is that he wants to eat well and take care of his body because he wants to live longer. And so what I'll then show him is some of the evidence and the research that points to how intermittent fasting can help with cell regeneration and how people who eat less generally live longer. Now, what I will always phrase it in the form of a question. I won't say like, you're wrong and you don't know what you're talking about and here's why, because I have this evidence that contradicts what you're saying. What I will say is, what do you think about this? So I read this article and so-and-so Journal of National Medicine or whatever, where they've said that people who eat less generally live more, and intermittent fasting has this effect on cells and blah, blah, blah. And ultimately, this could help with longevity. What are your thoughts on that? And 9 times out of 10, I will slowly be able to get the person over to thinking in a different way because I'm not directly challenging them. Next is egoism. So look, everyone is egocentric to some extent. After all, it's the ego that serves as the administrator of the psyche after the vulnerable childhood years have passed. Egoism becomes a problem when your subject tries to comprehend everything with them at the very center of the context and situation. Egotistic individuals tend to twist information or facts to fit their mold of reality. I'm sure we've met people like this before. There's a drive to exclude almost anything that disagrees with their point of view, and therefore it can be difficult to deal with an egotistical person. Now again, this is something that I deal with my friend, not necessarily because he's an egotistical person, but because he has a deep knowledge and expertise on health and fitness, certainly more than I do. And so anytime I bring something to the table that might contradict something that he thinks, he takes it almost as like a personal insult. He's like, wait, I'm the expert here. I'm the one that's been doing this for X amount of years. And again, so I will never present it in a way to say, you don't know what you're talking about. What I will say is, look, man, we're learning, all of us, like the smartest people in the world are learning new things that we didn't know just 20 years ago. I mean, when I was a kid, the food pyramid that we were living on was telling us that we should be eating bread and cereal most of the time, right? Which now today we learn is probably the opposite of what we should be doing. But my point is, I will take him out of the equation and not make it about what he doesn't know or what he missed the step on. It's more about, are you aware of this new information? And by the way, there's a little secret tip for you. People will generally defend their beliefs, even if they realize that they're wrong, because they don't want to look stupid. But if you can introduce a new piece of evidence or information that they weren't aware of, it's easier to get them to change their belief because it takes them out of the equation and takes them off the hook. One way of overcoming egoism is presenting information that makes it appear that you're not disagreeing with your subject, which is what I just showed you before. And then next we have centrism. To engage in centrism is to become fixated on a particular event, subject, object to the exclusion of all other details and elements in the equation or situation. Egoism is one form of centrism, but you won't see egoism every time you interact with others. The situation's always different depending on who you're talking to at the moment. The problem with people who engage in centrism is that they're unable to connect other elements with one another to create a more comprehensive and functional picture. It's a bit like someone telling you they cannot drive a car because the steering wheel isn't the color of their liking. Centrism can cause people to make strange associations that ultimately stultify further thought and action. A speaker may address centrism by creating the necessary connections between ideas. Since it's a form of fixation, widening the net and creating a new narrative to replace the one that the subject is using is essential to letting the other person understand the system as a whole. Ideally, persuasive speakers must adapt in describing and discussing both specific details and the global picture. So, I know that was a lot. We jumped through a lot. Like I said, this is actually a module in a course of mine, but I felt it was really jam-packed with value, so I wanted to share it with you guys today. Like I said, you can grab a free copy of the sample edition of the Street Persuasion Playbook. I put that link in the description. Go ahead, grab it for free, download it, read it, enjoy it, and I will see you guys on the next live stream. By the way, if you're getting value out of these live streams, give me a like, leave a comment below, subscribe to the channel, and make sure you hit that bell notification so you get updated when I release more videos and do more live streams like this. I'll see you guys next time.